As we continue our week of confession, today we're going to hear a parable that involves confession, a very familiar story from the 15th chapter of the Gospel of Luke, verses 11 through 24, the parable of the loving father who has two sons. Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am dying of hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then his son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him, and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate." But one of the many fascinating things about this incredible parable, and this is only part of it, we don't hear about the older brother, but a couple things that I think are significant. One, for the younger son to go to his father and ask him for the share of the property that would belong to him is a way of going to your father and saying, "I wish you were dead, because I care more about what you can give me than I do about my relationship with you." This is an incredibly devastating and insulting thing to ask a Middle Eastern father, and the audience of Jesus would have been shocked that the father didn't boot him off the property, much less that he granted the request. But you notice the confession, that when he goes off and he's feeding pigs, what a terrible thing. There's nothing lower for a young Jewish person to do than have to feed unclean animals. But he gives this little speech, right, that he prepares in his head about how I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be treated as your son. But when his father sees him coming at a distance, which means the father was looking for the son, longing and hoping that he would return. And when they meet and the son starts his rehearsed confession speech, the father doesn't even let him get through all of it. Instead embraces him and kisses him and says, put a robe on him, put sandals on his feet, because sandals are the sign of a son, a member of the household. The slaves were barefoot. And put a ring on his finger, and let's kill the fatted calf and celebrate, because my son who was dead is alive, he was lost and is found. Part of what confession is about is recognizing the one to whom we are confessing is as loving as the parent in this parable. And so we don't have to go to God in fear or in trembling when we confess our sins. We go knowing that we're going to the most loving parent you could possibly imagine, who welcomes us with open arms.